React has three simple and fundamental concepts that you need to understand. The first concept is its components. With React, we describe user interfaces using components. If the term component sounds scary to you, you can really think of components as just functions. In fact, simple React components are actually just vanilla JavaScript functions, as we'll see in the next video. In any programming language, we invoke functions with some input, and they give us some output in return. We can reuse functions as needed and compose bigger functions from smaller ones. React components are exactly the same. They receive certain input objects, and they output a description of a user interface. We can reuse a single component in multiple user interfaces, and components can contain other components. However, you don't really invoke a React component. You just use it in your HTML as if it was just a regular HTML element. Also, unlike pure functions, a React component can have a private state to hold any data that may change over the lifecycle of the component. This ties to the second concept about React, its nature of reactive updates. React's name is the simple explanation for this concept. When the state of a React component, the input, changes, the user interface it represents, the output, changes as well. This change in the description of the user interface has to be reflected in the device we are working with. In a browser, we need to regenerate the HTML views in the DOM tree. With React, we don't need to worry about how to reflect these changes or even manage when to take changes to the browser. React will simply react to the changes in a component's state and automatically update the parts of the DOM that need to be updated. The third concept about React is its virtual representation of views in memory. Okay, this might sound a bit weird, but to build HTML web applications with React, we don't write HTML at all. We use JavaScript to generate HTML. Let me tell you why. When your web application receives just the data from the server in the background with Ajax, you need something more than HTML to work with that data, and you have two options. You can use an enhanced HTML template that has loops and conditionals, or you can rely on the power of JavaScript itself to generate the HTML from the data. Both approaches have advantages and disadvantages. React embraces the latter one and eliminates the extra step needed to parse an enhanced HTML template. One big advantage for this HTML and JavaScript approach is how it enables React to keep and use a virtual representation of HTML views in memory, which is commonly known as the virtual DOM or the tree reconciliation algorithm. React uses the virtual DOM to compare versions of the UI in memory before it acts on them. I'll show you the practical value of that once we're comfortable with the basic syntax of React. Let's go back to the concept of the component. A React component can be one of two types. It can be either a function component or a class component. Both types can be stateful and have side effects, or they can be purely presentational. You should learn them both, but prefer to use function components over class components because they're really much simpler. Class components, however, are a bit more powerful. In this course, I'll use a mix of these two types so that we can learn them both. Both types can be compared to regular functions when it comes to their contract. They use a set of props and state as their input, and they output what looks like HTML but is really a special JavaScript syntax called JSX. The props input is an explicit one. It is similar to the list of attributes an HTML element can have. The state input is an internal one, but is really the more interesting one because of how React uses it to auto-reflect changes in the browser. These two input objects have one important difference. Within a component, the state object can be changed, while the props object represents fixed values. Props are immutable. Components can only change their internal state, not their properties. This is a core idea to understand in React, and I'll have many examples for you to bring it home. Okay, let's talk about this syntax that looks like HTML but is not really HTML. Here's a full example. This is a simple React class component without any input, so no props or state, and with a simple h1 in a div output. On the left side, the component is written in the special JSX syntax. Remember how I said we don't write HTML at all in React, and instead we use the React API to generate our views? In a way, this JSX syntax that you see on the left is the compromise to that rule. It makes our task of using the React API as close as possible to writing HTML, but it is not HTML. It simply gets compiled to the pure JavaScript calls that you see here on the right. These React.create element calls that you see on the right are what we ship to browsers. They are the JavaScript representation of this component's DOM, and they are what React can efficiently translate into actual DOM operations to be performed by the browser. This is important to understand, but how about we stop with the theory and slides and write some code to understand all these concepts better?